For decades, Camilla Parker Bowles battled to reach her current position. Front-page attacks, protest signs outside churches, and 50 years of public animosity would have broken most people twice over. And she made it through it all. She survived the criticism, the media cycle, and the national outcry against her. She received the title and the crown. She was appointed Queen Consort of the United Kingdom. And the difficult part ought to have ended there. However, there is currently something going on inside that palace that no press release, royal spokesperson, or official statement will ever mention. And since the current situation originates from within those gates, it is worse than anything that happened to Camilla outside of them. I'll set the scene for you. It wasn't one of those little charity luncheons that receive 3 lines in the court circular and vanish from the news cycle by Tuesday afternoon. Rather, it was a royal event. An official biography or palace press release could never convey as much information about the real power structure within the monarchy as a proper institutional occasion, the kind that carries weight in a way that only certain royal events do. The Queen Consort was required to attend this event. She should be there, according to protocol, precedent, and the logic of her position. She was anticipated, but the invitation never showed up. There was no communication, no apology, and no explanation from anyone in the palace admitting that anything out of the ordinary had happened. Where a formal invitation ought to have been, there was only silence. Furthermore, silence of that particular form is not a coincidence if you are familiar with the communication style of the British royal family. It's a message. Now, some might consider this to be an oversight. There might have been a scheduling issue. Perhaps something was misplaced between offices. And I would tell those individuals that this exclusion did not happen overnight. So it is obvious that you have not been paying attention to what has been going on inside that palace for the past few months. It is the most recent and obvious data point in a pattern that has been developing for some time. When you put everything together, it tells a story that the official royal communications machine would much rather you ignore. What you should know about Camilla's role is as follows. The foundation of her entire rehabilitation journey, from the most despised woman in Britain to a sitting Queen Consort, was her regular attendance at these kinds of institutional events. It sent a message each time she showed up at a significant event. She belonged there, it said. It stated that the integration was finished. The proof was her presence. Therefore, the signal runs in the exact opposite direction when that presence is absent from an event where her presence was anticipated. And that signal is received by everyone in that world who is aware of how these things operate. No one has to explain it. A dispute is the backdrop for all of this. According to people who are familiar with the palace, it was constructed gradually. There was pressure that built up over time around a particular set of decisions related to how the monarchy operates during this specific period, rather than a single blow-up or one awkward conversation. At a time when succession and continuity are at the heart of everything, we are discussing the formal operations of the Crown. And no one would have chosen that question to be more urgent given Charles's health. It appears that Camilla entered that delicate, high-stakes situation in a way that went horribly wrong. She took a stance on some arrangements that she was not authorized to oversee, and she expressed that stance forcefully enough that it did not appear to be an offer of advice. It seemed to be an attempt to influence the result. And those in charge of those arrangements, who had the power and the determination to resist, did just that. What followed made Camilla's predicament considerably worse. The original parties were not the only ones involved in the dispute. It moved through unofficial channels and the networks that link the various households and power centres within the establishment, just as things always do inside a palace. William's circle was reached by it. Camilla's attempt was discovered by William's household, and they responded with the deliberate, pointed silence that has characterised palace dynamics throughout this whole period. No action on her part. No continuation of the protection that the household of the future king might have offered if it had so desired. Just being aware of it and choosing to do nothing about it. That is not a neutral act in terms of the palace. It's a position. Catherine was also aware. Regarding this, sources are consistent. They told her. She was aware of what had transpired, and she had no desire to use the power she had obviously been gaining to lessen Camilla's punishment. She didn't initiate the response, but she also didn't obstruct it. None of that will come as a surprise if you have been following Catherine and Camilla's relationship for the past year or so. The conclusion is that Camilla had exerted excessive pressure in an area that she lacked the authority to control. The individuals she opposed chose to let the results of the particular agreements they were overseeing speak for themselves. William's family refused to offer protection. The anticipated invitation to a significant royal event simply never happened as a result of Catherine's refusal to step in. Not a single dramatic statement was made. Camilla received no official notification that she was being left out. There was no altercation, no yelling match, and no recorded ruling that would have given her a paper trail to refer to and contest. It was merely a silent, exact, institutional mechanism of an invitation that was never sent by individuals who were fully aware of their options when they decided not to send it. In this world, power functions in this manner, cleanly, not loudly. Let's now discuss Charles, because if you have any sympathy for the man at all, it is truly painful to consider his role in all of this. And I say that as someone who has spent a good deal of time discussing how this family functions, because what Charles is currently dealing with is not an easy situation where the best course of action is clear and all he needs is the guts to take it. It is the particular kind of impossibility that results from loving two people who are pulling in different directions and having the power to take action, but not the financial means to do so. His goal is to keep Camilla safe. There is no doubt about that. After 50 years of institutional opposition, personal sacrifice, and public pressure, he decided on this woman. She remained by his side through situations that ended most relationships in much more comfortable ways than theirs. His gut tells him that he ought to use his remaining power to protect her standing within the organization he is officially in charge of. The issue, however, is that William, his heir, the future king, will be in charge of this establishment after Charles, and will eventually have more power over everything inside those walls than Charles does. Not now, but in a future for which everyone in the palace is already actively preparing. It would be more expensive than Charles can currently afford to use his power against William's wishes in a formal, public manner that documents a rift between the current king and his heir. Consider the timing. Everyone in that world knows that his health condition has altered the calculation in ways that no one is publicly expressing. More than at any other time in recent memory, the question of continuity and what the monarchy will look like in its next chapter is urgent. A visible public rift between Charles and William in that setting is more than just a family issue, it's an institutional one. It produces precisely the kind of instability that casts doubt on the monarchy's future in ways that the institution is currently unable to handle. Charles is observing then. He is not interfering, and it is difficult to read accounts of the king's private life during this time without feeling something for him. The word that keeps coming up isn't angry, frustrated, or even depressed in the crisp, novel way of something new. It is worn out. The profound, cumulative tiredness of someone who has been struggling to keep an impossible situation together for a long time and is running out of resources to do so. There have been discussions on the periphery of the exclusion, cautious discussions that approach the subject without actually entering it, without the need for formal stances to be expressed and formal repercussions to follow. Charles does this by maintaining surfaces and carefully maintaining the appearance of functionality, even when the reality beneath them is far less functional than what anyone outside those walls is permitted to see. This is how he has always done things. It is a survival strategy, developed over decades of navigating an institution and a family that rely as much on appearances as on reality. However, the surface is thinner than it has ever been. You get a very different picture of the British monarchy than what appears in the official photos when you watch him attempt to keep it in place right now, knowing what it is costing him and what is sitting underneath it. I want to zoom out and see the complete picture of the last few months, so please take a moment to step back with me. Because what you see when everything is arranged chronologically is not a collection of distinct incidents. It is a pattern that points in a single direction and is intentional, consistent, and unmistakable. Start with William supporting Princess Anne's direct confrontation of Camilla in a private meeting. That was the first obvious fissure in the surface, the first instance in which the years-long, meticulously controlled private reservations were permitted to manifest themselves in front of witnesses in a way that could not be discreetly reversed. Then Catherine's violation of protocol, thoughtful, exact, and in a public place. A woman who never makes a mistake, but when she does, it's with the kind of surgical precision that indicates it was done on purpose. Everyone who was proficient enough to read it understood the message, which was sent in the language that the institution created. Then William flatly rejected Camilla's official request. The future king's first clear-cut rejection of the current queen consort on an institutional authority issue. Camilla's palace plan was dismantled before it could gain any real traction, not a diplomatic workaround, a soft redirection, or a refusal. Moving as quickly and thoroughly as someone with the institutional standing and support needed to completely shut it down. This is the invitation that never materialized. William's family refusing to step in. 5 different forms, 5 different moments spread over several months, all pointing in the same direction. The boundary between Camilla's current position and her attempts to relocate has been marked by each and every one of these incidents. Clear and consistent patterns within a disciplined institution are not accidental. They are not the result of separate individuals coincidentally coming to the same conclusion apart from one another. They originate from a common understanding among those who are constructing something together and who have a clear idea of what must be restricted in order for the project to move forward as planned. William and Catherine are the ones constructing it, and Anne is their strongest and most active ally in the nearby generation. And what they are constructing is the next iteration of this institution, based on their own reasoning, their own understanding of the proper place of authority, and their distinct perception of what the monarchy must cease to allow in order to become what they are determined to make it. During the current reign, Camilla has been the focal point of that accommodation, not the only one, but the most important one. In its most practical form, the reorganisation is centred on the question of her place in the monarchy, which William is currently actively reshaping. It is getting increasingly difficult to misinterpret the response provided by this pattern. What does that mean for Camilla? She is not one to accept a situation without looking for the leverage points within it. So let's actually consider her options. She developed a certain kind of instinct over the course of 50 years of negotiating difficult terrain. And those instincts do not just go away when the terrain changes. She is currently considering her options. The issue is that, compared to what she would have expected when she began pushing in the directions that led to this result, the options are significantly more limited. The most obvious course of action is to escalate the situation by going straight to Charles and formally and explicitly requesting that he use his remaining authority to address the damage being done to her reputation within the organisation he oversees. And that seems like a sensible course of action at first glance. The king is him. She is his spouse. After a disagreement that his household has been observing without taking action, she was barred from an important royal event. Charles is the one who has the authority and the drive to deal with that. However, Camilla is already aware of the outcome of that discussion. She has spent enough time inside this establishment to comprehend the computations Charles is performing. He must choose between keeping her safe and maintaining his relationship with William, which is currently essential to the institution's stability. It doesn't really help her to formally ask him to make a decision and put him in a situation where he must either stand up for her or admit that he can't. At the worst time for the institution, if he agrees and steps in, there will be an obvious rift between the current king and his heir. She has the most devastating possible response if he declines. Although she hasn't specifically asked, the question of whether Charles could defend her if he so desired is still open, at least for the time being. A straightforward discussion that concludes with him stating that he is unable to permanently end that. Formally escalating to Charles entails exchanging an unsettling uncertainty for a verified worst-case scenario. She is unwilling to make that trade. The second option is the formal constitutional route, which involves consulting advisors to determine whether the exclusion violates the rules governing the Queen Consort's involvement in such important events. Creating a documented record in an area where the palace's favoured ambiguity tool is less useful. In contrast to the current situation, where everything is understood but nothing is formally confirmed, there is an appealing version of this that is formal, documented, and produces something tangible to point to. However, pursuing it formally entails formalising the exclusion. It entails proving, through the act of contesting, that the Queen Consort was prevented from attending a significant royal function after a disagreement at the palace. Through any formal procedure, everything that palace silence has kept at the level of well-informed conjecture becomes a documented fact with a paper trail. And compared to the current unconfirmed version, the fully confirmed version of that story seriously undermines Camilla's remaining public credibility. The remaining stability of her position depends in part on the discrepancy between what the public believes and what is officially documented. It does not protect her to close that gap with a formal challenge. The damage she is attempting to limit is accelerated by this action. What's left then? According to sources, the atmosphere in Camilla's home in the weeks after the exclusion was one of purposeful recalibration. Discussions about positioning and what the next few months should entail in order to stop the decline in her status without intensifying the conflicts that have been causing it. When the environment becomes hostile, the option that has historically worked best for her is being carefully considered. Patient, strategic withdrawal, retreating from the overreach that set off these reactions and concentrating on protecting what she still has rather than pursuing what has been denied. The king is still Charles. There hasn't been a formal transfer of power. The current confrontational dynamic makes it impossible to explore the possibilities that exist in the space between now and whenever that transition takes place. She will buy herself time if she backs off, stops pushing against the boundaries William and his circle are drawing, and concentrates on upholding her formal role without trying to expand it informally. Time in this institution has always been her most dependable ally. Since the people reorganizing the palace around its future aren't stopping to wait for her to recalibrate, the question is whether retreating is really enough to change her trajectory at this point. Whether Camilla is pushing against the walls or not, the area they are building in is getting smaller. The previous month's pattern isn't just reactive. It is more than just a reaction to her overreach, which will end when it does. It is a proactive project with its own pace and schedule. Not only are William and Catherine protecting themselves from Camilla's attempts to increase her power, regardless of what she does next, they are actively changing the informal power structure within the organization. That is the aspect of the situation that, in contrast to her earlier challenging times, makes her position truly precarious. Previously, she was being opposed by external factors such as public opinion, media attention, and institutional opposition from those who had never accepted her. Despite their strength, those forces were outside the structure. If you have a stable position within the organization, you can outlast outside forces. What's different now is that the forces are internal, coming from those who will lead this organization after Charles, who currently oversee a large portion of it, and whose vision for its future does not include Camilla's role that she has been working toward. The crown was rightfully hers. No one is claiming the title. However, a title is not the same as one's actual position within the organization. And the past few months have focused on the gap between those two things. Camilla is aware of this. She endured everything the outside world threw at her, battled for 50 years to enter these walls, and eventually found herself in a position that briefly appeared to be truly secure. She was unable to fully foresee that the biggest threat to that position would come not from outside the palace gates, but from those who were already inside, constructing the next phase of the monarchy around a future that has a very clear idea of her place in it. The building is changing around the uninvited queen, but the people making the changes are not.